It's always so exciting to see a garden in person that you've only seen in books and have it be even better. For 5 decades, Pamela Harper has been experimenting with unusual plants and plant combinations, which have been the inspiration for her remarkable garden books.
My father was a keen gardener, and as a little girl I trailed him around the garden. I became a serious gardener after I was married, when we had our own house and absolutely no money to pay anybody else to make the garden. So it was me or no one, and from that point on, gardening was the mainstay of my life. In 1967, my husband was offered a job in the United States that seemed tailor-made for him. So we arrived, we came down the ruts in the sand to this little red brick shoebox with a septic tank overflowing onto cracked concrete in front of the house, and sort of looked at each other and shook our heads. And then we came inside and looked at the spectacular view out at the back of the house and looked at each other again, and we knew this was it. Fortunately, my husband was a great do-it-yourselfer, and he set about redoing the house while I set about the garden.
How many years have you been working on this garden? Or I should say, working in this garden?
I've been here for 32 years, Erica. There were periods when I didn't get very much done when I was working or doing other things. But effectively, all of my spare time for 32 years has gone into this garden.
And did you start with the shrubs and the trees because they play a significant role in really highlighting lots of the herbaceous plantings?
I'm afraid the way my garden has been done is the way you're not supposed to do it.
Pam!
I go to the nursery or I look through catalogues and I fall in love with certain things and I buy them, and then I decide where to put them.
That makes you just like the rest of us.
That's right.
So it seems to me, if I had to say there was a theme in your garden, it's color.
Oh, yes.
You really work with color.
Color and texture.
Color and texture.
Yeah.
Would you call this a color echo? Because I know you wrote a book called Color Echoes, and
I would say that's a color echo, the euonymus with the spirea behind it. You have the same color but different textures.
But how did you come up with the composition here? What azalea is that?
Stewartsonianum.
Stewartsonianum. So that's an old variety. It's been around.
And I bought it initially. I wanted a sort of warm, scarlety color. And then the other things sort of followed bit by bit, and Shayna went in there largely because there was a gap just there. And it's worked out very well. But I can't say that I thought, oh, Shayna will look good against those rhododendrons. And I thought it would look good with the yellows, but I hadn't thought about the azaleas at the time I put it in there.
So Stewartsonianum and the Shayna, that would be Acer palmatum. And the boxwood euonymus and the spirea. And again, even though your garden is 2 acres, I could do this in my garden, which is very small. Just take the same elements, and so that this euonymus is going to look good almost all year round. So you did think about those things in terms of how long will things look good?
Basically, yes. When I put the maple in, I knew it would look good with the yellows. I hadn't thought that it would look so, I hadn't thought about it at all.
So what I'm getting is that you have your basic rules, but you stray from those a little bit.
Oh, yes, sometimes a lot. And then if I don't like it, I move it. If it's a plant that I know that can't be moved, and I'm not sure I have the right place for it, I will put it in a big container and just sink the container in the ground and live with it for a year or so.
That's good advice.
And then if I don't like it, it's easy to lift the container and try it somewhere else without disturbing the roots. That's worked very well for me with a lot of things.
We're on a pathway here that really separates 2 different areas of your garden, and you've got such a big garden, but you've got paths throughout the garden, and they really do help define areas and separate them.
They do, and enable me to get closer to the plants too. And if I was starting over, I'd do more paths and narrower beds.
So you don't have rooms?
I don't have rooms as such, but different areas of the garden are segregated by the plantings. One bit's blocked from another by you know, a bend in the path or a big plant, so you don't see everything all at once.
Is there an advantage to not having rooms?
I think it's less formal.
Less
If you
formal.
have rooms, it makes for a rather formal garden.
And I like standing here and getting glimpses into other areas down this path and up that path. And this ground cover is, I know, ajuga, but it is so vigorous and so lush. The flower stalks are
A foot long or
Foot
more.
long.
Yes, this is ajuga Catlin's giant. It's a good bloomer and a very good spreader.
Ajuga is historically been a plant that you can get at the local garden center or hardware store, and it's because it is such a good ground cover for shade.
It is a very good ground cover for shade or half shade. And I especially like Catlin's giant. It's just so much showier.
And what a great idea to have a burst of chartreuse right in the middle of ajuga.
That's this area was supposed to be blue and chartreuse.
And that's a conifer, no less.
That's Picea orientalis skylands, one of the nicest of the spruces.
And that will get to be quite a bit larger.
Oh yes, it will. It's a very slow grower.
And then the chartreuse and the hosta, and then the acorus, and then the little lysomachia and that waterfield. That's just a beautiful, the way it carries your eye up to the spruce, and then another conifer behind it.
What I wanted was contrast in textures, carrying the chartreuse theme through.
You obviously didn't start with this many plants.
I think I started with one.
With one? And how long did it take to go from one to this?
It's probably taken, I don't know, about 8 years to go from one plant to this spread.
The advantage of gardening in the same place for a long time is that you do get very familiar with the different areas of the garden, and this is actually one reason, I think, for not drawing up a plan on paper when you have a new garden and deciding this is going to go here and this is going to go there. You really don't know what is going to do well in a particular part of the garden until you've watched that garden for several years. You know where the wet areas are, you know where the cold lies longest, you know where the ground is most fertile, where it's moist or where it's dry. The nicest thing, or another of the nice things about being a long time in a garden, is simply watching plants grow up.
At every turn in this garden, I was overwhelmed by Pam's sophisticated use of color. Through years of trial and error, she's developed her unique gardening philosophy.
I don't lay down rules about gardening, and I don't listen to anybody else's rules. Every garden is an individual garden. It should be what the owner wants it to be. But my personal preference is for color coordination.
We're surrounded by all these bright, shocking colors that on their own, I'm not a red person, but I love it all together.
If you ask gardeners what color they like least, they will invariably say orange. And I don't like orange mixed with pinks or in other parts of the garden, but in here, in summer, there will be lots of orange. I sometimes call it my knock your socks off area.
Well, these colors will knock your socks off.
They really do when it's at peak. It's oranges and scarlets and bright brassy yellows, none of the gentle colors. On a hot summer day, it fights back against the sun.
This is something you'd see in an English garden even. The azalea with the stump and the gold heart ivy.
Except in England, the azalea would be an Exbury hybrid, and they don't work very well here. They don't like the heat. This is Aromite Sunrise.
What a great name.
Bred in the south for the south. Fully sun hardy.
And so beautiful with this
With the gold
ivy.
hearts.
And is that a forsythia, the back here?
Yes,
some
that's
sort of gold?
a gold-leafed forsythia.
So you've got lots of other bright colors along here. You've got euonymus and more azaleas.
More azaleas.
And you've got a honeysuckle that matches your shirt. and
Yes.
Complements your shirt.
Almost the native ever-blooming honeysuckle, supposedly Linicera sempervirens. And I really like that wire mesh,
I do too.
which is sold as deer fencing.
Okay.
And it works very well as the support for vines.
Pam, you just walk right over the lysomachia.
Yes, it spreads so rapidly occasionally I do have to reduce it so it does no harm to walk on it.
So how do you go about coming up with combinations, your beautiful paintings that we see?
I move a lot of plants.
You move a lot of plants.
I'm constantly moving plants, and when I see something that really works, I will dig it up right then and move it where I think it should be.
So that is something that if somebody's just starting out gardening, it's often intimidating. They see a garden as beautiful as yours and they think, how do I get a combination like this beautiful columbine with the iris and the honeysuckle?
It makes it much easier if the garden is compartmentalized. I know this is the hot area of my garden, so I don't want pink in here, for instance. This is my oranges and scarlets and bright yellows. But
so
beyond
compartmentalize everybody.
That makes it easier.
Right.
It's just one way of doing things, but it makes color easier to use.
I move plants around constantly. I have nursery beds at the side of the house, and I find within your own garden you can move plants at almost any time with a little care. Dig them with a big root ball, and then I'll move them to the new place. And if it's hot, I will stick a fork in the ground and lead a board against it to shade them temporarily while they're settling into their new quarters. Water them well.
I found the sheer number of plants in this Virginia garden to be mind-boggling, but Pam Harper has tested and documented many, many more.
2 acres may sound like a lot, and I think any keen plants person will agree that any garden big enough to grow all the plants you want to grow is going to be too big to take care of. I have 5 shoe boxes full of 3x5 index cards of the plants that have gone into this garden. They're not all there now. Some have taken themselves away, some I have decided I didn't want to keep, but many thousands of plants.
What is the name of this beautiful, it looks like an iris with the chartreuse foliage.
That's what it is, and the nice thing about this iris is that chartreuse foliage looks good all through the growing season, and I wish I knew really how to pronounce its name, which phonetically is Aiki no Kagayaki. And it's a hybrid between the old yellow flag, Iris pseudacris, and the Japanese iris.
Okay, and is it less aggressive than Iris pseudacris?
It's not aggressive at all, but it's a good doer.
And that color is just even without flowers, I'd like to grow that.
Yes, it's lovely. The colors for this area are chartreuse, a sort of continuity along the front of the border, then creamy yellows or pale lemon yellows.
Like that columbine.
Or ambery yellows, but not hot yellows. And then the secondary colors are blues and purples.
And the red bud is really a nice focal point in the center of that bed. So you think about that as well.
Yes, that's forest pansy.
And that's certainly readily available.
Yes. And that's a color that's a great addition to almost any color scheme, what gardeners call purple, the sort of bronzy wine colors.
Pam, this viburnum makes me want to go out and buy a viburnum, a spring blooming type like this.
And this one is Watanabe, W-A-T-A-N-A-B-E. But I think that summer snowflake is exactly the same thing.
And how many years have you been growing this Watanabe here in this spot?
I think this one is around 12 years old.
12 years old. This viburnum is much wider and broader.
Yes, Shasta is a good viburnum, but it needs a great deal of elbow room, where snowflake or Watanabe needs sky room. It's not as wide.
And you've underplanted it with this wonderful...
This is the Japanese roof iris.
The white one, I love that. I have that in my garden. And just the foliage, even when it's not blooming.
It's a lovely iris. It won't grow on roofs for us.
Where does it get that name?
It does grow on roofs, and when I was in France, I visited Yul Brynner's garden. Remember Yul Brynner?
Of course.
It was growing all along the thatch of his cottage, but not here.
It still doesn't stop me for rising to the challenge or trying to rise to the challenge when somebody says, you know, we can't grow that here. And sometimes I have to try anyway, and mostly they're right. There's a lovely thing I heard many years ago that amused me then and amuses me still. It goes, they told the young man that it couldn't be done. Smiling, he said that he knew it, but he tackled that job that couldn't be done, and he couldn't do it. And that's been true of my gardening in many respects. I've tackled a great many things that I couldn't do. I've killed a lot of plants.
People are always looking for new perennials. For beginning gardeners particularly, they want to know, what can I grow? And I would say Baptisia is pretty easy to grow.
They are very easy to grow.
Now there's a white Baptisia, there are blue forms, there's
yellow.
A big range of colors.
Pale yellow, bright yellow, purplish, yeah. They enjoy full sun. They will tolerate a little bit of shade, but not really deep shade. They won't flower well in deep shade. They don't like root competition, and they don't move well. You need to get them in their permanent place.
They're not starting to sound so easy to grow. They don't move well. They don't like voles. They don't like root competition, but they do like sun.
They like sun.
You've got a sunny, well-drained soil. You don't have voles. You're probably going to have great success.
That's right. But they're not difficult. They are easy plants to grow.
And I just thought of something. They don't need staking.
And they don't need staking.
Every year I say, I'm not going to buy more plants. I'm going to buy more kinds of plants that have proved to be good. Then the catalogues start to come in. And so I sit browsing through the catalogues, and I can't tell you why some plants are just irresistible. A lot of emphasis on foliage. I add more and more foliage plants, ferns, things that, sedges, grasses, things that really do look good for a long time. And there's the usual touch of garden snobbery. If I think nobody else is growing it and I have access to it, then I have to have it. It's my garden and I'm going to grow what I like, and everyone else should do that too.
I love getting to see so many of the plants I've read about in Pam's books. Her respect for the natural landscape and the art of gardening is truly inspiring.
When we bought this property, at the back of the house was an apron of land surrounded by water, which is very close to the tidal creek from the Chesapeake Bay. It was so serene and beautiful that right from the start I decided I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to be able to sit and look at the water and at this natural scene and not garden this part of the property. And there are some wonderful little wild things that pop up, and that's one of the advantages of not interfering with what nature is doing out in that part of the house. And I have plenty of land in the other, about acre and a half, to grow what I want to grow.
So even stumps in your garden are the perfect place to stage plants.
Yes, it was pretty much accidental. That was a pine tree with the ivy growing on it, and the little linaria was growing in a patch at its feet on the ground. And after I cut the pine tree down, the linaria climbed over the top, and the whole thing just merged into
It's a beautiful garden detail.
a mat. Isn't it pretty? But I can't really claim that I planned it.
Now, I don't believe you, Pam. You can't believe that I can't believe you didn't plan that. It's just so perfect.
Yes, it is. Well, there are a lot of happy accidents in gardens.
I'm just happy gardening. I don't think there's anything virtuous about it. It just makes me happy. For me, it's nirvana. For me, happiness is when you're not aware that you exist. And when I'm working in the garden, I'm lost to myself. I'm totally involved in what I'm doing. And that's my idea of happiness.